Our X-Files. Welcome to our X-Files vault. Regular people talking about unexplained phenomena. UFOs. Ghosts. Cryptids. Hidden archaeology. Weird science. Our stories. Our takes. Our X-Files vault.
Welcome to our X Vault and the first show for a new show I'm doing called The Daily X. I'm going to go into a story today that's kind of like Groundhog Day if you were stuck with a serial killer. It is actually a true story. I don't know how to explain it, but we'll get right into it. So around 1990, I was living in Worcester, Massachusetts, and there was a gym there that was open 24 hours a day. I was working as a bartender at the time, and a lot of times after work, I would go to the gym. So the gym is called Bay State Gym on Webster Street. It's a minor industrial area. The gym itself is actually in an old factory, and there's a bunch of little old red brick factory buildings right there. It's also a quarter of a mile from a very large cemetery. I'm not sure the name of that cemetery. There's some residential housing not too far from there, but it's a pretty quiet street. It's called Webster Street, and especially at night, it's a very quiet street. So anyways, I'm in the gym on the exercise bike, which is at the time was in the main room, in the back of the room, facing the main desk, which was right next to the door that came in off the street. There were only two other people in the gym. One was someone who I didn't know and just happened to be working out next to me on one of the exercise bikes. We hadn't communicated in any way. And then there was a kid that was working the desk, and because it was like 4 o'clock in the morning, he was asleep behind the desk. In fact, I remember he was like a Holy Cross kid, I believe, but he was asleep. So I'm on the exercise bike, and all of a sudden a naked young woman comes in the front door screaming, "Help, someone's after me, help, you have to call the police, please help me, someone's after me." And I'm you sit there for half a moment, you're stunned, like I'd say she was 18 years old, but maybe 20. And at the time I was only probably 22, 23 myself, so I could probably judge fairly well her age. So me and the guy on the bike jumped right off to go over to help her out. We didn't know what was going on. I can still, as I'm going towards the young woman who was just absolutely in a panic, could see the Holy Cross kid just kind of wake up and like just staring, he was too stunned to move for a few seconds, So the first thing we got over there, again, this is like 30 years ago now or so. He, I call the police, and he gets up right on the phone, that the kid behind the desk, and calls the police. And our first thought was, is there, we're looking out, the door had been pegged open. It was a summer day. And our first thought, is there someone actually coming through the doors? Is there actually someone chasing her? So, but she was in a panic, and she's naked. She wasn't harmed in any way that we could see. You wanted to just find her some clothing, which, there was no one else in the gym. I don't remember what we did. I think we quickly grabbed like a sweater or something like off the lost and found, and we pulled her further into the gym. We didn't know if someone was about to come through that door, what was going on. And so we called the police. We brought, and she was the whole time just determined she wanted to be in a locked room. She wanted to hide. She just was trying to get away from whoever was after her. So we brought her into a room in the back, and and she was still only partially kind of covered by this shirt that was hanging down low. So it makes it a little awkward. I think the other guy that was in the gym was an older guy, say my age now. So, or certainly in his 40s, at least. He wasn't a kid. He wasn't a kid like me and the kid working the desk, but none of us really knew for sure what to do. And Fortunately, so we got her in this back room. We left the door, like, say, half open. And we didn't stay with her, probably just uncomfortable, because I said she came in naked, but we stayed near that door. And we kind of, and it wasn't, it wasn't long. The police responded very quickly, which they generally do in Worcester. The police, and especially that time of night, I'm sure there was nothing else going on, but police in Worcester usually respond very quickly to calls. And that was the case here. So the police came, and they came through the front door, and the kid pointed towards the back, and we went over, and we were like, yeah, she's in the back room here. And we were probably, maybe 5 or 6 steps from that door into that back room. And we went back there with the cop, and she wasn't there. There was no one inside the room at all. So she had disappeared. So the police did a search, and they couldn't find her. So let me just pause here, the story, for a second, because it gets weirder. Just to talk a little bit about myself and what the plans are for this particular show on this channel. My background, I grew up in Lawrence, Mass. I went to Clark University in Worcester, and I majored in history and philosophy. I ended up, after working in the Boston area in the corporate world very briefly, I hated it. I ended up, I had started bartending at a bar called the Blarney Stone right before my senior year. And I ended up spending most of my life in the bar industry as a bartender, manager, owner, that kind of thing, for, 20, 25 years. And I met a lot of fantastic characters. I miss, some of them are gone. And pretty much all of them are people that I am not in touch with, except on Facebook. I did get to meet Dave Kenny a month ago, and that was great. Another one of the great characters from that. So as I go through these shows, I am going to talk about some stories from that time. I have to kind of be careful and pick and choose, because there's some, I don't want to get anybody in trouble. There was some wild things that happened. They won't all be, actually, I don't know if any of them will have to do with the unexplained, but there are some phenomenal characters. Some of the best people you'd ever want to meet in your life were from that neighborhood and from that bar. So I want to have a chance to just kind of share some of those stories with the world. So why I started this channel? Well, almost 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer, terminal cancer. I'm still here, so doing very good. I had been trying to, after I got out of the bar business, I had been trying for several years to reinvent myself as a writer, which is something that I had wanted to do when I was a kid, but it never, once I got into college, I just never did anything with it. I think I took one English class at Clark. I mean, I just never put any time or effort into it, and I regret that, but it is what it is. So very hard to try to start doing something like that later in life. Got lucky and sold the screenplay a little bit with my co-writer, Dina McKinnon, who's recovering from COVID. If she sees this, I hope you're doing better, Dina. But when I was diagnosed with cancer, one of the things I decided, and I was talking about this with Dina at the time, all right, no more, no more messing around, no more. I want to start a novel and take it all the way through to the end and finish it. And so I began right away, just working very hard on it, and I managed to finish it. I'm not saying the novel's good. Who knows? I think it came out pretty good, but to get it published, you need a publisher, and it would really help to have an agent. Very hard to do that when you're in your 50s and you don't have a publishing history. It's hard to get someone to take a chance on you to even notice you. So, and I don't really fit the profile for what agents and publishers are looking for right now in terms of new writers taking them on. In a lot of ways, they don't fit the profile. So that's okay. I mean, I just continued writing, but also for me, I've always been kind of, if a door is closed here, try to find a back door. There's always other that's the necessity is the mother of invention, right? And it can force you down paths that end up being rewarding. So along those lines, I started doing some sports writing to try to develop a little bit of a publishing history. And so I was writing for a place called 2040 Sports. And I enjoyed doing it, because I've always science and sports were the two things that I liked the most in my life in terms of interests. And I, rather than watch Netflix, I watch either sports or science videos or discussions lectures every night before I go to bed. So I started realizing too that you're not going to develop an audience as a writer writing stories, because nowadays, you know, even if you look at some of the bigger ones like the Bleacher Report, which it's good luck finding an article on there anymore. It's really, we live in a world where people want visual. They want visual and audio. They want to watch a video. So if you look at like Barstool Sports and things like that, it's all about podcasting now. And podcasting had not been something that I'd ever considered or wanted to do. I know, you know, I have especially video podcasting, I kind of have a face for radio, as old friend Marty Foley used to say. Not really the personality for it either, but you know what? I'm willing to give anything a shot. Again, looking for those back doors. And so I figured I'd give it a shot. So I started doing some sports podcasting, did some for a friend from Worcester, and I did with some guys from New York that I had met, and had a lot of fun doing it. So I had the idea, why not start my own channel? But the idea was to get a bunch of other people on board that just are willing to talk about something for a half hour once a week. And if you do that, you might be able to build an audience. So pooling a bunch of, especially in the world of, and the entertainment world, not really established people, but smaller people like me that are trying to make it as writers or filmmakers or musicians. They kind of have an incentive to just go on and talk about what they're working on. And then what we needed, what I needed for this was a genre. And I researched what were the top genres in podcasting. The top one was true crime. And I like true crime, but the problem with true crime is that it really kind of requires a lot of research if you're going to try to bring something really informed to the subject. But the other, just under that category, was actually unexplained phenomena. And so I'm thinking, and that was around the time when the government report on aliens was supposed to be coming out. And I'm thinking, all right, this, anybody can have an opinion on this. It can be fun. You don't have to do any research. And so let's just, why don't I try doing something like that? I myself have never seen a ghost that I know of. I've never seen a UFO or an alien or a Bigfoot or skinwalkers or anything weird. I'm a science person. I don't tend to believe in those things. The aliens are flying across the universe just to mutilate our cattle. I don't know. I'm skeptical about that, but I'm a writer. So I've always loved a good story. So I'm willing to suspend disbelief sometimes to listen to a good story. I used to, when I got home from work, like the show Coast to Coast AM, depending on the guests that were on and stuff, those could be a lot of fun. And so I was kind of looking more, but I'm looking along lines like that. But myself, I don't think I've really experienced anything. Although, as I started thinking about this over the last few weeks, there are some weird things that I've experienced. I never filed them away in my own mind as unexplained phenomena. And they tended to be stories that I'd kind of forget. And now I'm going to go back and tell some of them. And now that I've kind of remember what happened, I'm not saying there was anything supernatural or paranormal or anything, but they're unexplained and they have some odd elements to them. So that's what I want to do with this. And with this new show, The Daily X, what I'm going to do is, I've always liked, every morning when I get up, I read the sports, certain online journals I go to, and then I go to science page. I always have. And now I'm going to add to that mix. There's a few really good websites that cover the unexplained. And, one of them is like Mysterious Universe, things like that. So I'll just pick some stories that are topical in that day that I find interesting and go over them, and go over some of the science stories, in particular science stories that might be the kind of thing that would expand one's thinking about reality, or because I think it's healthy and at least entertaining to do that for people to always, because the world is a little more mysterious than we tended to think. At least if you were growing up and you accepted science. I remember just like say 25 years ago, I started reading about quantum physics, and I won't go into it now, maybe on other shows I will, but the double slit experience and just the idea that it's 100 years later, it still is not solved. the world is weird. The universe is very weird. So even mainstream scientists now, many of them insist that we live in a kind of multiverse where the universe is constantly splitting into an infinite number of new universes. So I don't know. The world is even regular scientists kind of believe in a very strange universe. So that's where I'm going to go with it. So I'm going to go with the show, the Daily X. I'll just go over some of that stuff, and then I'll bring on special guests to interview. And we'll hopefully maybe even find some other hosts for this show down the line. Will someone come on and talk about these things, and we'll just try to keep it quick and interesting. So let's see. I have my notes here. If I have anything else I want to talk about. All right. So let's just get back to the story of the missing girl. Oh, I wanted to say too, in telling these stories, you hope to learn something about yourself. It's a process of self-discovery. I've experienced some success in life and a lot of failure. And no doubt some of that failure might have been bad luck, but no doubt a lot of that failure is rooted in my own flaws. And these are things that, as I go over these stories, that some of them might have nothing to do with me, but it'll jar up some other information. It's a process of discovery where I might get to understand myself a little bit better, which can be painful, putting yourself up to a mirror. But, again, back to why when I got my diagnosis and why I continue doing this, I don't feel my personal story is over yet. And I feel that I have stories to tell. So for those of you that are here that come in and join me on them, thank you very much. And feel free to message me, contact me, anything you have at all. So back to the girl went missing at Bay State Gym, and the police didn't find her, didn't know what happened. I went home. The next night, I'm back at work at the Blarney Stone. And maybe to set the scene, since the Blarney Stone will come up in some of my other stories, the Blarney Stone is a neighborhood bar that on certain nights has had a college crowd. Sadly, the Blarney Stone, I think recently went defunct after all these years and is now, I heard it was being turned into a karaoke bar or something, or I don't know. I'm not sure what's there, but sadly, the Blarney Stone is no more. But it's a big horseshoe bar in the middle of it that dominates the room. And so the great thing about it was so you could seat 30, 40 people at that bar. So when you're the bartender, it's like kind of being on a stage and you're connected to all those people, and the people and they're connected to people on the other side of the bar too. So it's kind of cool the way it creates a little community in there. And so I'm in there early in the shift. So say 7 o'clock at night, and this guy comes in. He turned out to be a cop. He was dressed plain clothes. He was in his 50s. And I only knew he was a cop because he showed me his badge and he said, "Can I talk to you for a moment?" So I took him into the back. There's a little kitchen in the back area. So I'm just kind of standing in the entranceway of the kitchen near him and talking to him. I'm not going to mention this gentleman's name because I don't know if he's still alive. Like I said, he was in his 50s back then, but I do know a little bit about his family too. So I don't want to say anything, but this is the only time that I ever met him. I think later on I met some of his sons, but again, didn't really talk to him. Didn't really have any reason to, communicate with him. But so the only I can best describe this guy is he looked worn out. He looked very, he looked a little frazzled. Not in the way of like, say, the Columbo on the old TV series. He looked, he had a lot in his mind and he had been through some times. Well, anyways, he showed me some sketches that he had. And he said, do any of these look like the young woman that you saw last night? And I said, yeah, actually, all of them do. They look just like her. And he was like, okay. And he asked me if I had any other details, if she had said anything. And she really hadn't said anything, except at some point, I don't remember how, she did tell us that her first name was Hannah. So we did get, that. I guess we didn't really was very awkward. We didn't know how to connect to her. We're all guys in the gym, and this young woman comes in distress, and she's naked. So I don't know, but we did manage to get her name out of her before she disappeared. So the cop left, and okay, so the night goes on at the Blarney Stone, and later on at night, say 11 to 12 o'clock, there was a young cop that used to come in at the time when he got off work. And so we knew him pretty well. So when he came in, he's sitting at the bar, and I asked him, I said, I told him what happened, and he hadn't heard, what had happened the night before at the gym, but he knew exactly what cop that I was talking about. And he said, yeah, he goes, again, I don't want to say his name, but he used to be a detective. And about 25, I don't know, I think it was 20 or 25 years earlier, almost the exact same thing had happened, not quite in the same spot, but somewhere in that area. He had told me where, but I don't remember at the moment. But a naked young woman had showed up someplace. Her name apparently was Hannah, and was being chased. Somebody was after her. Looked about the same age, 18, 20 years old. And then she disappeared right before the cops could get there. And I guess this detective had responded to the case and had been investigating it. And it just became something that it got into his mind, and he became obsessed with it. He had to find out what happened to this young girl. He felt a need to protect her. Who knows why? Maybe he had a younger sister or a daughter or whatever, or just part of the job. And the strange thing was, apparently, according to legend, every few years, something similar would happen, where sometimes they'd get the name, sometimes they wouldn't, but a girl like this would show up naked, demanding, yelling for the police to be called. And then she was in absolute terror for her life. And then she would always disappear before anybody could get her, before the cops could get there. And the other commonality was, I don't know, this is a strange, I'm sure there's no connection, but right in the back of Bay State Gym is where a train line goes through. And it seems like all of the instances where this happened were always somewhere within a couple of miles of there, but always not far from the train tracks. I don't know what that means, or if there's any connection to that. So, but this cop had become so obsessed with it that he actually had been, I think, demoted from detective and was just a regular officer, but he was still obsessed. And anytime something similar came up, he would go out investigating it. It just, apparently the whole situation just tortured him. So I had actually forgot about this story until once I started this channel. That guy who used to come into the bar all those years ago, he hasn't talked to me, but he's a Facebook friend, and he sent me a message saying, did you remember that? And I said, oh yeah. And so I started coming back. But, it's funny when you talk about a story like this, it brings up certain emotions that just in your own life, things that you've been through. And whatever this girl was, I mean, obviously because of the nature of the channel and the way we're telling this story here, putting a mysterious twist on it, but maybe it's just maybe this kind of thing happens in a city like Worcester fairly, regularly enough, where a young naked woman comes in looking for help, and then maybe it gets twisted and they all get connected in some kind of way. And maybe it's really just a different story each time, but in each time it's someone that is in need, and people are unable to help her. And, everybody knows police, and people have different opinions on police. But in my position as a bartender, as a bar owner, and as someone who hired a lot of police and worked with a lot of police, they're not all perfect. And when you have a bad experience with a cop, you don't forget it, because a cop has a badge and there's nothing you can do. But the overwhelming majority of the police that I dealt with were just actually really above the cut when it comes to being good people that cared about their jobs, cared about helping people. And so those cases like that, when they can't solve a crime or someone and they can't help someone, it bothers them, and they do take that kind of thing home. Or maybe that's why we see them down the bar a little bit more too. It's definitely a difficult thing. And So when you look at a story like that, where there seems to be a repeating pattern, whether it's a pattern there really is a Hannah that's like in Groundhog Day, except instead of being Bill Murray at, in a little town during a snowstorm, she's somehow being chased by someone who's trying to kill her or trying to harm her, or whether it's just kind of these things happen every few years in the city, but there's still a pattern there, and you wonder about that. And so I've kind of looked at, and I've always wondered. I don't tend to believe in the afterlife. I'm not a religious person, but I have an open mind, and you wonder if one of the things about life is that it repeats, but the plot changes, but the characters are always the same. So maybe, after you die, you end up in another world, probably similar to our own, but where things are a little bit different, and all the characters are back. Maybe they look different, maybe they look the same, maybe you don't remember what happened before, but there's kind of a repeating pattern that goes on for infinity. And that can be a pleasing thought, because you think about your loved ones and you think you will see them again in some form. And but obviously, if your life if you happen to have the misfortune where your life involves a serial killer or some other kind of killer or a really evil person, man, it's a terrible thought to think that you're stuck with this thing repeating over and over again. But the other thing that I take from this story with Hannah is, in thinking about what the meaning of life is and thinking about those connections that you make with people. Some of them, they just come into your life, but then there are those missed chances too, where you maybe should have connected and didn't. And especially in the bar, there's a lot of people that come in and maybe they're having a hard time and they're looking for that. And there are times that you really, as a bartender, take that to heart and you really try to, but there are other times you miss it, and then you think about it, well, what was that a chance to really make a difference for somebody, and you weren't able to do it for some reason. Certainly nowhere near, like, say, what police have to go through. But I remember, and it's not about maybe it's not always about doing anything, even though that can be important to try to help someone. It's about that connection. I remember about a year before, maybe a few months before I left Worcester and left the bar life, I had fallen on really hard times myself, was living in an apartment that had no electricity, no heat. So I had barely enough to kind of eat myself. And one day I remember it was a cold night. It was like a January cold night. And I was walking over to the CVS pharmacy, which was nearby. And I only had about $20 left to me and to my name. And it was a dark night, no one else around. Like I said, cold. This middle-aged woman, I can still see her face now, probably in her 40s, maybe early 50s, came out and she said, "Can you spare me a few dollars?" Now, when you're around the bar, there are professional grifters. There are people that are out there all the time. I've had someone come into the bar once telling me he needed money for his asthma medicine and he was pretending to not be able to breathe. I didn't know if it was real or not. So I said, "I'm going to walk you over to the pharmacy and get the prescription." He had showed me a prescription and I'll fill it for you. So I wasn't just going to give him the money. And it turned out to be a clown. And so you have to you never know. You try to distinguish between the real ones and the people who really need. So I don't know, something about this woman, it just seemed real to me. So I pulled up my wallet and I gave her $10, which isn't a lot, but for what I had, it was half of what I had. But the thing that I remember was she came up to me she responded by tearfully hugging me, and she held on to me for what felt like a full minute. And she was just, she was gripping me, and she was not a big woman, and I could just feel whatever she was going through and she's so much appreciated. I don't know. I never had anybody. I mean, we've all given money to people before that are like that, strangers like that. I never had anybody do that. There was some kind of connection that was made. And I still, even though I never saw her again, I can still see her face, even though it was dark. I can still see her face in my mind's eye right now. And I'll never forget her, So I don't think the money was maybe what she needed. I'm sure she needed the money, but I think the tears were from the connections. Another human being just said, yeah, let me help you. And I didn't say a word. I just said giving her the money. So it was just, that connection is when you look in someone's eye and you make a real connection. And that's a difference between just giving someone money and not making a connection. So that, which brings me back to Hannah, and I think about, did I screw that one up in that regard? Because when she came in, like I said, I was only like 23. She came into the bar. She's naked. So that probably, from a guy perspective, that makes you a little bit uncomfortable. A naked girl is just running and she's in. So I tried to do all the right things, just like the other guys, the two other guys that were there did, in terms of getting her clothing and looking out to see if someone was coming and getting her, making her feel safe until the police came. But I never looked into her eye and made that connection. That basically, it's a wordless thing, but just that thing when you look at someone and say, all right, whatever's going on, you're not alone. We're here. I'm here. And I never did that. And maybe that's why I forgot about her story. So anyways, the way that I want to end this story is, when I got that message from my friend on Facebook, who's a Worcester cop, or possibly a retired cop now, I'm not sure. But apparently something similar to this happened again a couple of years ago, where this time it was at a shopping plaza, and a young naked woman showed up, and I'm not sure if they got her name again, but again, she showed up, and the police were called, and once again, she wasn't there. And I don't know, this goes on, I guess, where some of the guys at work on the force won't really talk about it. It makes them uncomfortable, because, and if you think about it, there's so many cases like that. If you're in that line of work, that you were not able to, you tried to make a difference and you couldn't. And maybe and depending on what your particular job is for the police department, maybe sometimes every day feels like that. And when you run into things like that, they haunt you for a long time. And so this young woman, Hannah, had haunted that older cop that I met, and I don't know how many other cops over the years, and how many other people that she's haunted. But thank you for listening to the story. And I have several other stories to go over, and I'll get caught up on them soon. Please join us we have a group on Discord. I'll post here, and or comment on YouTube. Reach out if you have your own story, because while I do have a few good ones, I will run out of them. Only so many weird things happen to me. Good night, guys.